Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new season of Tales from the FinTech Crypt. We haven't announced the end of last season properly, and that's not ideal, but we have wrapped up the last season with the amazing episode you've heard where I had the pleasure of chatting to Brett King. This season already has amazing names that are in the can. We've had conversations around all things from digital assets to AI, obviously, and the evolution and involution of fintech from all points of view. And again, big names, your Matteo Rizis, your Andra Soneas, your Jim Marusis, they're all going to be present in this season of Tales from the FinTech Crypt, along with our stories and along with a number of anecdotes from the road. So tune in for this season, and thank you so much for being there. Andra Sonea, a name you will remember if you care about financial services and fintech. Andra is one of the best minds of our generation. I firmly believe that, and I have said that to everyone who was willing to listen over the last 15 years that I have had the extreme pleasure of getting to know her. Andra has not only a mind that will endure in our industry, but one that's keenly curious about ways to improve financial lives of everyone, not only a few of us. Andra has worked in all kinds of big places, and she has been a part of SAP, IBM, Lloyd's, FinTech OS, and many other that would ring a bell. But in her varied journey, she's learned so much, and she has ensured that she remains the most amazingly modest professional that she is, despite the fact that she has had so many accomplishments that she should be proud of, and the latest of them is her PhD. Listen to Andra telling us what she's learned along her very, very sinuous road of wisdom and passion, and hopefully see you back next week for another conversation with a fintech veteran. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tales from the FinTech Crypt. I have someone with us today who, as you heard in the intro, is not only integral part of building fintech, but I am very, very fortunate to be able to call practically my sister. So hi, Andra, and thank you so much for accepting my invitation. In the intro, I was saying this, but I don't know how clear it is to people, so I'm happy to go over it a little bit again. We met, God, I guess 10, 12 years ago, and when we did meet, fintech was just starting to rear its head out of the bowels of technology. But yourself, were you a banker? I think.
I
Right.
think I was working for IBM at the time, but yes, I was
Right. Yes,
working
that's
with
right.
financial
And
technology.
I remember like yesterday. I mean, we connected on so many levels, of course, and I'm not going to go through the details of our lives over here. I don't know how interesting it is to people, but we did meet at what was essentially an informal meetup, or rather a lesser than big conferences meetup. They don't probably exist anymore like that anywhere, and this was somewhere in Germany, I think.
Yes, it was in Berlin, and it was so-called
Right.
Barcamp Bank. So it was an unconference focused on banking, and it's a miracle that we've met there, because I was coming from
Stockholm,
London,
yeah.
and you were coming
Yes,
from
and
Stockholm,
we are,
I think,
yeah,
isn't it?
I don't know how many people know, but we're both Romanian. So to meet somewhere in the middle of Europe, coming from two different other places and be in the same industry, it was quite a miracle. Because let's face it, we were, I don't know, 10 women in financial technology in those days, maybe 20.
Yeah, very few actually. I mean, I think in financial technology in general, there were others. I think the ones who kind of identified with this small group were the ones who would have liked to do things differently, or would see a future in improving banking through technology and so on. So it was very fringe. When we started, it was like, what's wrong with you? Why are you not happy with the status quo?
These events, what fringe events, as Andra says, Barcamp Bank, that's indeed the name of it. I had forgotten it. If you look it up, you might be able to find some things, but probably not much. They were practically a meetup of people that were coming from all kinds of walks. They were either internal bankers or working for a technology provider, or professors. I've met quite a number of people that were in academia. And we were all just there going like, right, but what's money really? And what can we do to make this better, faster? And how many of those, I don't know, moments of thinking do you think translated into real technology in the meantime?
I don't know, but what I know for sure is that the discourse and the understanding has changed, and it was very much advanced through those meetings. So for me, the first Barcam Bank was in London, and it was on a Saturday in the basement of, I don't know, a technology company which graciously let us be there, And I found the digital footprint of that meeting. And if you look at the participants, you find people who, later on did amazing things in find what would take you of your own house or of your own, nice schedule on a Saturday to discuss banking in the, in a room without windows. On a Saturday. It was a particular group. For me, what was very interesting, because obviously professionally I was a technologist, and we were specialized in banking, and we were even specialized in particular type of systems. So you would look at the risk systems of the bank, you would look at the treasury systems of the bank, financial accounting, financial reporting, all the architecture of the back office of the bank. So for me, that was a bank at the time. And I was not alone. We couldn't care less about who does what and how they use it. So you could have a perspective of the bank as an entity which acts on the market, and then you are focused on a particular type of system or particular types of systems and architecture. And I remember that in Berlin, when I met you were on the other side, facing the client, understanding the client, what the client does. And for me, that was like, really, it might feel stupid, but really, I simply didn't cross paths with people who knew something about that. And you had a very good understanding and a very good way of explaining what you saw. And they were also in that meeting in Berlin. What amazed me, there were people who had nothing to do with banking. They were from gaming industry or nothing, not a particular profession or angle which would link them to banking. They simply cared about how they do banking. And I never encountered this perspective, So it was very impactful for me. Even you could say, what, Saturday changes your perspective? And yes, it does, because the perspective was so different from, my financial services technology expertise.
I think this is a really good point, and I'd like to
Yes.
I always try to land it for people who are listening for educational purposes as well. And that is because over the years we have both been mentors and teachers to hundreds of startups and people starting in financial services. So we know that the perspective that they get of the industry is very much dependent on the moment that they've entered it and how much more mature the market was. So for the sake of kind of the reason why I come back to this history all the time is because it does give you this clear perspective as to what sides were. And as Andra well points out, just the way that the front end and the client experience was a shock to some people on the back end. The reverse was also true. There were loads of propositions that were only focused on how do we pay, what's a payment, and to them it was shocking that there's a spaghetti system that will not let them do so. So the two sides were very kind of separate to a degree at the time. They are not anymore necessarily, but still for anyone in the industry thinking in terms of what is the back end and what is the experience side of things is super important, I think, because it offers you a much broader perspective as to what all the technology that needs to change is. And speaking of which, I think that the degree to which you see change on the front end is very, very different to the amount of change that has existed ever in the back end. So this is 10, 12 years ago. The systems you were working on then Are they still in banks then?
Many systems are still there. The way I experienced it, let's say, because maybe there are other perspectives out there. But the way I saw it, when people started talking about fintech or doing things in fintech, they started from the visible part of banking and slowly going down. But it was very often in complete ignorance with what is underneath. As an architect, you always, or that was my let's say professional mind, which I think formed very much in IBM, because in IBM this was a profession, and you think in terms of constraints, and you see always around the problem, you see the bigger picture and the context. You constantly move between detail and bigger picture. You try to make sure that you don't break one or the other. By fixing the detail, you don't break the big thing. And if you remember, I was always almost coming like for the proper crypt even then, because I was saying, yeah, but you cannot do this. I mean, I understand you want this pretty thing on top, but I tell you where this data lives, and you cannot bring it in this form. We do not have this information. And it was not out of, I don't want to do this. No, I was the first one who would have liked to do this, but I knew where the constraints were. The changes and the mindset didn't penetrate so much as to change the whole tower, the whole stack of the bank. And it's not a matter of will. It's rather a matter of, it's a result of our lack of action for decades. You know very well that for many years there was such a gap between the so-called business in banking and technology, and very often the gap would be wider or narrower depending on the culture of the bank, but the gap was always there. And instead of finding a way to, align, this is a problem that we're trying to solve, how to solve it better, it was always a battle for, okay, who takes the decision? The business people. Who are we selling to? These guys, they buy a system which they don't really know how to fit into technology, or the technology guys buy a system which doesn't properly solve the business needs. And it was always this crazy battle. But usually business has a budget for big investment, or this type of strategic change which takes years. It was like technology, we can do what we need to do, but they don't see the technical debt accumulating, and this Gordian knot of systems growing and growing to the point that you not only that you don't understand it, but you cannot touch it anymore, because you cannot untangle Gordian knots. You look at them and you either take a sword, or, the fact that we ignored the evolution of technology outside banking and we let this mess be created, limited a lot what you can do, how much in depth you can
There
go
was
with
so much
with the
you've
proper
tackled there.
changes.
I love it, but there's
Yeah.
so much
So
we need to unpack for people there. So the first thing that Andra is referring to, and it's so prevalent, I've written about it in the People Before Tech, I've written about it again in Tech Culture, is this push and pull that some organizations have between, some non-generative organizations, I should say, have between understanding or having this extreme separation between business and IT. And in some places it might be between proposition and IT, it might be between, the customer facing side and technology. But however you put it, as long as you have these two parts, you're never going to get less technical debt, and you're not going to get less human debt either. So both of those things, as Andra says, are going to just grow exoskeletons on top of them that will make them encapsulate to a point that it will be impossible to move forward. But we were at a time, I think, when we're talking about 10, 12 years ago, where that those knots weren't quite established yet, and there would have been ways to penetrate them in some shape and form. And part of the thinking we were doing at the time was always kind of being able to think of direct paths to go from the consumer to the data, or to the movement you needed behind the scenes. obviously, without the help of amazing minds like yours that understood the architecture, it would have never happened to on the front end either. So that's why I'm saying you are absolutely similar to the industry. I've seen your mind in action so many times, explaining the incredible vast forest of dependencies that can exist behind what looks like just a layer of data, that it would have been impossible to move without your knowledge. So I'm really grateful, and I hope the more people know how. No, genuinely, like, this is not even me. I'm very proud of Andra, obviously, but I know that there would be 20 people that I can think of right now that could think of instances where your capability of seeing the underneath of the system is the only difference between them making a successful front-end proposition and not. So genuinely, the capability of understanding what was happening in the belly of the beast, to put it that way, was not as common as that. And there was also, and I think that's worth remembering, and I think it's happening again, there was this big difference also between the people that were inside the bank and had knowledge of these things and the people that were trying to make propositions and were outside of it. And that kind of difference wasn't helping on top of the IT versus business, on top of the front end versus back end. So there were just so many different planes of differentiation instead of togetherness that
Yes.
you were an absolute bridge at the time. And I remember, just as you were shocked that I had the clarity on the front end, I remember multiple systems you would quote that it would have never occurred to me that they exist or they should exist, or that they should or shouldn't, is a thing I would advise no one thinks of. In banking, you should never worry whether something should exist, because that will drive you insane. Just look at what you have and see how you can do better. But yeah, I really love that you've put that perspective to people. And I love that, going back to what was then the situation, what is now the situation. Do you think, it's an open question. It's not leading. I don't know what you have seen of late. I have lost somewhat contact with the fintech industry for a few years. I've seen other industries. I've marveled at how much less of debt that they've gotten for themselves as compared to banking. In these other industries that I've looked at, such as, automotive, logistics, pharma, the back end technical debt was a much more present notion and a lot less of a taboo and a lot more attacked in a agile way. So they started chipping away from some of their technical debt. Would you say the banking does less of that? And if so, why do they do that?
So when I worked in technology for other industries, what was obvious to me is that doesn't matter what they were doing with less money than banking. As a consequence, from the beginning, they couldn't afford the inefficiencies that I could see in banking, and the banking world was very tolerant of. I remember, for example, that at some point I worked as a consultant for Alcatel.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's
And,
explain to
which
people what it
doesn't
was.
exist anymore, but it was a great company produced telecom equipment. They would produce, sell, install telecom equipment in faraway countries. They would run projects which would be years with components which were produced, modified, blah, 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 around the world. In the team I was working on, because I was a very hands-on consultant, we're doing third line support for the financial systems of this company for many countries, like from Brazil to, I don't know, all the European countries, whatever you want, yeah? So complex stuff. We're 5 people. When third line support means things broke badly, nobody knows what it is. So complex problems where you kind of have to go across all directions and you have to fix it fast. The equivalent for a bank would have been hundreds of people. Hundreds. The systems would be poorer quality in terms of process and technology. There was lots of Excel, lots of manual manipulation. I just couldn't believe my eyes when I saw this. And I was wondering, how can you afford this? So that company, doing, let's say, necessary stuff, real stuff, they cut the cost to the minimum, but they also knew That was the thing. They were able to calculate their cost for all these things all the time, every month. Are they above? Are they below? And in the banking world, around the same time, you wouldn't know where you are probably with the balance sheet of the bank. You would know probably 1 month later. And to me, this was absolutely unbelievable. So you moved across the industries, and it was a massive gap. Now things are better, but not necessarily much better, simply because it's also in the industry, manufacturing or selling, whatever. People are linked somehow to the logistic part of it, so they kind of it's tangible. See, things are moving, are delivered, are invoiced, are blah blah blah. In banking, things are a bit more abstract, and especially with if you work with more complex products in investment banking and so on. But even with the basic ones, there is little understanding and of profitability of things by product, by customer. This view completely it didn't even exist. There was just the accounting view, which would be by definition something that you do at the end of the month, and the mentality is very different. How do you think about your business operations in these different worlds? And because for a long time banking enjoyed a good profit margin, they could afford inefficiencies which killed entire companies and
That's a
industries
really good
and
perspective.
everything.
So, in a sense, they were a victim of being too flush from many points of view, and I think that's reflected in the bloat as well, in the fact that you could probably do the same amount of technology in banking with 10% of the people that they have these days employed. I know that will not be a pleasant categorization that I'm throwing out there, and I don't know the exact number, but most of technology is bloated. Banking technology, I think, is so. In other words, you could probably do the exact same job as like a quarter of the people, and you would come up with more efficient and more data-driven solutions, which is the crux of the issue. There was no reason to be forensic to the data level because there was no real driver to be super efficient. So we threw people at the problem, and we threw other systems at the problem instead of kind of figuring out what the most optimal configuration would have been.
Yeah. And another thing would be the other industry in general very often still cared about the customer to a level that banking didn't have to, because if you think, what do you do as a customer? You spend your own money. So what the bank does, they send you a list, a log of your transactions. That's it. In any other industry, they sell things, so there are invoices, there are payments which have to match, there are goods being delivered. So this granularity almost never disappears. You cannot say, "Oh, I don't care about this type of customer." No, you do, because you invoice them. You have to see that you got the payment. So the granularity of the business, it's carried through for a long while in the operations. While in banking, you spend your own money, good luck to you. We aggregate all the data according to the financial accounting or treasury or risk regulation, and we work from here on, and we run our institution because we as an entity, our job is to manage risk, and this is what we do. Okay, I'm talking here about retail banking, but of course things are a bit more complicated for commercial or investment, but
right. So by and large,
you get the
this
idea.
is yet another differentiation that's super useful, and we're not trying to make this into a masterclass, but there are structural differences and structural similarities between investment banking versus retail banking versus commercial banking and so on. And kind of understanding what the similarities are, I think, has always been a lot more important than understanding the differences. But equally, I think the way that the presentation has landed these days and the reality we have these days has rested on getting that understanding fast. What backend was front end, what's technical and what's business, and why is there a gap between them because of the cultural issues. And then kind of understanding that the backend systems were existing in a certain fashion, and that what that transport was like. But equally, I think one seminal and change moment that I know you were integral part of has been the idea of open banking. And each of us going forward, this is what good 6-7 years of us being in the industry into it. We were already veterans when PSD2 was kicked off. I remember like yesterday, still new to us, but to other people coming into the industry, these were rails already in place where the openness to the experience has forced a lot of the change you see on the back end of banks and on the proposition of banks. This is all kind of a reaction to the fact that there were so many more players, such as the challengers, such as all the other types of companies that were now invited to also offer some type of financial experience, which hasn't happened before. So when it comes to open banking, would you say that on the retail kind of side, one can see the effects? I would say it's quite clear to anyone listening to this that cares about financial technology. If it hadn't been for open banking, the access to the data that the consumer had would have been impossible. And I'm pleased for no one had to go through what we had to go through to get to that data. And now it's a different world. But does that make that difference on the other sides of banking as well? Has it meant bigger openness in allowing new layers of experience for, I don't know, commercial or investment or any of the other drier bits?
Not to the degree that we hoped for. So I remember very well the times that you mentioned where just the idea of having access to customer data, it was absolutely impossible. Needless to say, open APIs that are free for use if you are a regulated third party. That was absolutely inconceivable. We had high hopes, super high hopes about this. There are many. I don't even know where to start with this. As it happened, I did
That's
some
exactly why
research, academic
I was
research
pulling the ball
on
for you.
this. It was just for a year, but I was lucky enough to have a fellowship at Oxford, which gave me time for this, and I have selected 10 countries to look at where something happens, which looks like open banking and open finance. And I have selected a particular niche of companies that I wanted to observe because I thought web banking responds poorly out of all possibilities. And is this section of small and medium enterprises, which are neither here nor there. So depending what bank are you talking with, I would say that they are usually handled in the retail technology stack, not in the commercial stack, but they are big, yeah. So normally, you would say a business has a need for a specific financial product which don't exist in technology stack. You don't do factoring as an individual, but as a small business would be something that you would need, and it would help you a lot if it can help you your cash flow. You don't have any rapid arrangements for working capital and things like that. So I thought, okay, so the fact that open banking, open finance comes with the idea that the financial transactions, which are the gold, the type of data which is the most powerful data. So it's what you do, it's not what you say, it's not what you Google, it's what you buy, So that's gold. So the fact that all of a sudden this data can be consumed and combined with others, for sure, can improve this space. So I was looking, okay, let's look across countries. What's happening? So in the UK, the regulatory regime, and especially when UK was part of European Union and it was easy to, be regulated here and gain a financial passport for the whole Europe, all the people interested in fintech were clustered here more than anywhere else in Europe. So obviously, UK had the highest number of these companies, more than all the other European countries put together. It was such a striking contrast based on the same regulation, same things. It's like, okay, how do you explain this? There are no variation in the in the regulation adoption. Some countries didn't have one company registered as a third party. So huge variation across Europe, and quite interesting things in the UK. But then I looked at US, Canada, Australia, Brazil, Pakistan, Kenya, Nigeria. And it will take ages to talk about this. But what I liked and what surprised me surprised me in a pleasant way, not nice. The way the technical standards have been developed for this in the UK, I think was an example of good practice. Because European regulation very often delegates the execution of technical standards. And for such a regulation, which should make easier the interconnectivity between an ecosystem or startups and the big players, the standardization of the connectivity and data is essential for adoption. You can kill all the startups on the market if you present them with 70 types of APIs which give you
That's
shit.
no problem
Sorry.
at all. It's that kind of a podcast.
Anyway, and what I realized was that these standards, the orchestration of the API, the authentication, the authorization, you find them all over the world. The ones from the UK, they are taken, lifted, and you find them in Brazil, in Greece. And my surprise was to find them in Kenya. And I was like, how come? Because it doesn't come from the regulator. Startups embraced these things. You know, you see them there. You see the this is how the API should look like. This is the input. This is the output. This is your orchestration. Okay, we can execute that. So basically, the effect of open banking to go, a long while. Okay, what we see in the UK, we see in the UK. We can consume this information. It's predictable. It's not so much as we wanted. Not so much change. But what the effect on this globally on other countries which don't have infrastructure for this, we have a banking system which is open and as free as ours is here in the UK. To have startups building the infrastructure for creating the financial data, for consuming the financial data, for producing financial decision, I thought this is a success of open banking, which they should process more, and other organizations should take a lesson
So that's
from this.
practically
In my
the
view,
carry through of it has been standards as a practice, not standards as a regulation process, which is quite amazing. And I mean, just having that model be replicated organically must have been quite a surprising finding. I wish the UK was smart enough to put it in a newsletter or a diploma on some mayor's wall, but I doubt that has happened. That is very cool. I didn't realize that. That's very neat. But speaking of your research, and not to take away from the story, this was only a drop in the ocean, but you went from being a practitioner and someone who was building technology in and out of banks to then becoming an academic. So talk to us a little bit more about that and kind of what sprang you there. What was the core of passion that brought you there, and where are you today?
Yeah, I didn't see this coming. So I didn't plan to become an academic or researcher, but I was obsessed about what doesn't work in why we cannot execute the type of change we're talking about. At the time, for me, it was obvious that we have to do something about core banking, and until it changes, and until we can change that in a fundamental way, that will block transformation, even if it comes from the top or from the back end. And I had a fellowship with Anthemis at the time, and it was 6 months. And you're supposed to build the idea to build the company, but I thought, I don't know if I'll ever have 6 months again in this way to think. I want to think how this thing should look like. And I discussed with hundreds of people. I reached some conclusion, or I described what I saw or what I think in a paper which at the time was called The Ripples of Core Banking. My move to academia was based on that. I thought this is not a problem which is solvable now. So this is, I don't know, 7 years ago. With technology, we need to think differently about it, and we don't have that type of thinking in the industry. And I thought, okay, banking as I see it is is a network, a global network, but we are not the only global network in the world. We are not the only type of service which needs to be available 24/7. We are not the only essential service. Who else does this? Who else, have to manage this type of thing? So I was thinking of other infrastructure, electricity grid, transportation, and telecoms. And I wanted to learn more how these industries manage, how they understand, how they even model, how they even describe what they do, what they have, how they want to grow, what they want to solve. So this is how I enrolled in an urban science PhD, and I took myself way out my comfort zone, because I didn't go there as an expert to write my little thing. I went there knowing nothing, having colleagues who were 24, 25, super, super smart, just out of the university, the best out of them. And I was like, okay, let me try. I didn't know that I will finish this PhD. I just wanted to learn, and to learn from these industries and bring it back to banking. So I did a lot of that. I learned a lot, and my thesis will be soon public, hopefully. But and I worked on two problems actually. One was looking the architecture of the mega banks. How do we disentangle that Gordian node in terms of understanding? And my example, or I learned also from how neuroscientists describe what the brain does. Because nowadays they can do that, and they model it, and they describe it, and they analyze it. So I went on that path, learning from neuroscientists. How do you describe, model a complex system? How do you find out what it does, and so on? And another problem I looked at was what I called everyday banking, which is to me a subset of retail banking. We are talking about basic banking services as essential services that everybody should have access to. And it's an industry which to me functions as, or should be specifically classified as critical national infrastructure. That thing needs to function 24/7, needs to function across the whole space. Everybody should have access to it and should not be penalized in terms of costs, like it costs you an arm and a leg to have access to your own money. You'd say this is basic, but it's not defined like that. Banking is a self-regulated industry. They are not part of Critical National Infrastructure Commission. They don't do inter-infrastructure modeling. So if telecom fails, guess what? Your banking is down. If electricity grid fails, guess what? Your banking is down. We don't do this type of thing. And to me, it's ridiculous as we move more towards, digital banking, which has fewer points of failure and total failure. Because when digital banking is down, everything is down. 3 customers or 20 customers. And I modeled spatially what I called access to banking. So I went into learning lots of stuff I had no idea about, from spatial analysis, from geographer, from people who are focused on mobility and transportation, just in order to show the state of basic banking in the UK that can be modeled by a PhD student in her 50s. And we don't have the regulator who does that. Nobody put these things all together, and they should, because there's a lot of suffering actually around this in the UK. So on one side, we are fintech all over, and on the other side, basic banking, it's...
Right. That's amazing. That is an amazing journey, and I am beyond proud of your journey. I know full well, kind of we had a bit of parallelism there, where I went off to kind of figure out what is the hold up with the change. Why can't they move any faster? And my answer was that it's, it's human debt. Your answer is that it's tech debt, and why is the tech debt happening? But the kind of looking into the cultural holdups in banking have a little bit of that, nowhere near the kind of time and detail you've put into your thesis. I'm very envious of that. One day when I grow up, I'd like to be a PhD researcher as well. I think I really hope that by the time this is out. I'm not sure if it lands into the first season or the second season, but whenever it's out, I'd really love for people to go look up your thesis. There's a lot to be learned from it. There's a lot to be considered from it. There's a lot to kind of put in perspective. And I think this is important for both bankers and other parts of the industry, not only because you have this exceptional perspective, like I said a number of times before, where that awards you a view that other people don't have, but also that you've spent all of this time to look at the intersectionality, which I think is the key there. The reason we have such issues in society is because we tend to think of things in very singular fashion, or with a light to one topic at a time. And it's not until we figure out how they intermesh and what effects they have that we get far. So thank you for your work there. And I don't know if your plan is to continue to focus on something else that's theoretical or to come back to the practical side of things. But if anyone will be so lucky as to pull you back from the fun research, then indeed they would be winning. So thanks a lot for talking to us, Andra. I have a lot more questions, but I know that people barely have the 40 minutes for the podcast in general. So hopefully you'll come back and talk to us some other time. And thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.